So YouTube will be coming up in a second. Why is there two versions of that window? Okay, close. We are in a complete cluster at the moment because I can't seem to get this any bigger. And then we got to see if I can get audio relay to work and if that's going to work. Okay, so nothing yet on YouTube. You should hear something on YouTube at the moment. All right. All right. Yes, you hear me. Good. Okay, so you hear me. That's half the battle. This tiny, tiny screen that I've got going on is not working for me. But it may be better than nothing. So now I got to test some sound. I'm going to play something. And hope that I can play something small enough that it doesn't really get us content violations. Do you hear the sound from YouTube? Let's see. Nope, you don't.
To her husband.
You see
Someone needs to teach her a thing or two about washing clothes. Perhaps she needs to buy better laundry soap. Her husband looked on, but remained.
All right, so you should have heard some audio. We're not quite there yet, but we'll see. All right, so we got about 5 minutes to get my crap together, and we're gonna put that behind us. This little tiny screen. What an injustice that'll be. Hey, welcome to the YouTube channel. For some of my new subscribers, I see some of my new subscribers in here as well. I got a moderator. Luigi, is this account on YouTube your moderator account? It should be. So hopefully you've got your moderator hat on there. I've also given you moderator privileges on the TikTok side as well. So let me. I'm going to text Ally here real quick. All right, I'm going to see if I can bring in Ally and get her in here, and then we're going to try and figure out how to best do the video sharing. That's the trickiest part. We'll see what happens when I get her on. So you're hearing audio. By the way, do you hear the audio when... Well, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to play any... The tricky part's going to be whether or not you can hear my guest when she comes on. That's where we had the real problem last time. So I know I've got the mic working there. Am I getting an echo, by the way? Are you hearing an echo on the YouTube side? Or anywhere? Are you hearing an echo on the TikTok side? You certainly should not be hearing an echo on the TikTok side. No echo. That's a good start. Wait till we get the audio relay going between between Ally and I. This is where I got a cluster last time, and gosh, I hope I don't waste a bunch of her time figuring this stuff out tonight. So no TikTok echo, no audio echo on YouTube. Well, that is a good start, people. That's a really good start. Tonight we're going to have Ally Benevento come in. I'm probably pronouncing her right. Ally's here. Ally is here. Okay, so here's what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to try to we're going to work out a little bit of sound issues for about 3 minutes. So let me see if I can get her on. I'm going to send her on as, let's see. Do I go co-host or do I go guest? If we do guest, it's better because then she and I will see the same chat channel. So let's see. Invite Ally. So Ally's being invited. And I hear audio from her, I think. So let me get the layout. How do we do the layout? Are you there, Ally?
I'm here.
Cool.
Can you hear me? I can hear you just fine.
Yeah, I hear you fine. Now, I don't know that people are hearing you yet, so let me work on getting your audio, getting our layout done a little bit better if I can, because this is not a great way to do this. Let's see. I'm going to expand you. Hey! Perfect! So, well, half perfect. Bear with me. I'm trying to get this shit figured out. Let's see. Now if I can get this window capture resent over here, that'd be fantastic. All right. I'm going to add a video source. No. Stand by. Oh, it doesn't want to do that preview when I do that. So what if I bring it over here? Hey, look at you. I wish I could get you a little, well, maybe I can get you bigger. Oh, that's much better. Okay. Now I gotta peek at all what I'm showing everybody to make sure I'm not showing anybody a ridiculous amount of embarrassing things. Do they see anything behind the scenes? They see my chat. Everybody should see my chat. They see who's in my windows. Great. They see the layout options I have. Fantastic. All right. Can anybody hear her, or do I need to work on the audio now for her? Go ahead and talk.
All right. Can everybody hear me? I'm hearing you really clearly. So
perfect. All right, did you guys hear Ally talk? I need a sound check on YouTube and on TikTok. So I'm watching both. That was good, Luigi says. That means you heard Ally, right, on YouTube?
Cousin Luigi?
Okay, hold on. We're waiting for the confirmation on that it was you that they heard. Somebody said perfect. Ooh, that's my wife. My wife says perfect, so she can hear us both. Swah. That's half the battle right there. That's half the battle. It's funny. I'm trying to look over at you, but then I have to look at the camera over here because that's not positioned great. Oh, you just lost video. Did you lose video on purpose, or did I do that? Oh, you did that, maybe.
I might have done that by accident.
Fantastic. Sorry. All right. Let me do one more. So it looks like my layout options are just, I either go really big and you're small in the corner, or you're really big and I'm small in the corner. We'll think, yeah, since you're the prettier one, I'll have you be the big screen, and that way you'll draw in more people. All right, so sound check. So I hear both. I think we've got audio. Holy crap! I think we've got audio in both places.
You did it.
Well, yeah. I don't know that it's the best scenario, but it's something, right? Perfect. All right. So it is 6 o'clock. So let me. I'm assuming now. I'm looking to make sure. I swear. I think. Yeah. My wife says it's perfect on both platforms. So let me give us a quick introduction here, and then we'll get started. So my guest tonight is Ally Benevento. I hope I'm not pronouncing your last name incorrectly. You said people slaughter it all the time, and hopefully I'm not one of them.
They do, but you got it perfectly.
Awesome. Okay, perfect. So Ally and I got connected through some of my followers who said you need to bring this girl on and talk to her. She's a criminal defense attorney, South Carolina, 15 years, I believe, criminal defense attorney, both in federal and state court cases. I had her on once before. We had a long talk about Luigi Mangione, and it was fantastic. People had a lot of really cool questions. She had insights on how that relationship looks between an attorney and her client. Questions about the legal system. We just had a really good time. And I'm trying to get Ally up to speed a little bit on Idaho 4 because she's showing some interest in getting into the Kohberger Idaho 4 thing. But because this has been around for 2.5 years, I don't envy you trying to catch up with all the nuances of that case. That's a huge one. However, I do have prepared for tonight a discussion with general questions that I don't think you need to know everything about Idaho 4 or even a lot about Idaho 4 to give us some legal answers or some opinions, right? Because again, I realize this is Idaho and law is different in Idaho and stuff like that. So my idea is to kind of start off, if you will, giving you a question about Luigi right off the top. And then we can maybe start asking some questions about Kohberger and the Idaho 4. So do you want to talk anything first before we get started, or?
No, this is your show. I'm just here. So you go ahead.
Okay. So the $1 million question that I have, and I think a lot of people have, is Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Thomas Dickey filed a motion saying it was an illegal arrest. We talked about, the whole arrest was illegal. The false ID wasn't illegal for him to provide false ID. The search and seizure was illegal. The prosecution essentially responded and said, no, that was perfectly a legal, totally legal arrest. And now, if I understand correctly, it's up to a judge to basically review both arguments and make a ruling of such, right? But nothing is happening. And it's like dead silent over there. And I read somewhere online that they've made an agreement behind closed doors to extend the deadline, but I can't confirm that anywhere. So the two questions I have is, they can't just ignore, a judge can't just ignore this indefinitely, right? He or she has to respond to it in some way or shape or form. What is the timeline on that? And at what point can or will Thomas Dickey, for example, file a motion to basically have a higher court intervene and force the judge to make a ruling on it? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the answer to the first question is judges cannot, once a motion or a request is made before the court, a judge cannot ignore it unless one of the parties withdraws the motion that was filed or the parties agree by consent that the matter has been resolved between the two of them without the need for the court to intervene. Otherwise, the court has to issue an order, which is just making a decision about the relief that's requested in the motion or ruling on legal issues that were raised in the motion. And so, no, the court can't ignore it unless the two sides can come to some sort of an agreement, which sounds like it's probably pretty unlikely in that particular scenario. In terms of when can they get another court involved, they can't and they won't. Again, not licensed to practice in Pennsylvania, but if a case is pending in state court and you have a state court judge presiding over that case, a motion's filed, you're waiting on an order, there's no petitioning a higher court unless there's an issue that is ripe for an interlocutory appeal or an appeal before a final decision. There's no way to get another court involved.
Okay, so I might have been wrong about that. I thought I had read when I was doing my research, and I don't think it would be that state in particular, that there was, and I forgot what the term because it's always Latin, right, or whatever, and it was some term that I thought was you could petition a higher court to basically force the lower court to respond, but I can't remember what the term was. And if you're saying you're not aware that that's a thing, then maybe I read that wrong or misunderstood that wrong. So in other words, what you're kind of saying maybe is there's nothing that's going to force them to respond in a timely fashion. I mean, that's the ultimate thing is what is their deadline, if any? Can they just delay forever and not respond? Because you did say they do have to respond, but what's the deadline?
No, so typically in every state court will have its own rules and timeframes for when a person or another party has to respond to a motion. Typically speaking, there will be a motion filed. The other side has the opportunity to file a response. Sometimes you have the opportunity to reply, meaning if it's my motion, the state responds, sometimes I get a reply, and then at a certain interval, the judge will rule on that motion. Now, that can vary from state to state. I'm not familiar particularly with Pennsylvania's rules, but it's not an indefinite thing. Now, unless the parties have agreed that they will extend deadlines for time to respond or to reply, there will be a finite period of time during which the parties have to come to a decision or the court has to respond. I
think we're looking at in the state case, I think the next date on the docket is like the 26th of June or something like that for the state to meet again. And it's unclear to me what they're supposed to meet on. But my question is, do we think that Pennsylvania is going to weigh in and make a ruling on whether the arrest is legal or not legal before the date coming up,
Is that and I should probably know the answer to this question, haven't looked in a little bit, but that date on the 26th, is that for the New York State case or for the Pennsylvania case?
The New York State case. The New York State case. I kind of picture, I don't know if this is fair or unfair of me, but I kind of picture Pennsylvania kind of like hiding in the corner because they know that they have like the least important case out of all the three, just hoping that everybody will be paying attention to state court in New York, everybody will be paying attention to federal court so that they don't have to do anything. So I don't know that they're going to look at that June 26th status conference or motion hearing or whatever it is in New York as some sort of deadline for them. I think they're really just kind of hoping that everything else overshadows them. That might be completely unfair of me, but in my head, that's the way I'm at. No, that's fair. And here's the thing, I feel like I should know everything about this case. I've been following it since day one. And yet, here's another question I'm not sure I'm remembering correctly. Someone had said that bail was set at $1 in the state case for Luigi Mangione, and that the federal judge had said that they were willing to hear a request for bail. And yet no request for bail has been submitted from what I understand. So the question that I've been asked is, one, why isn't Karen asking for bail if the judge is willing to hear a request for bail? And two, what if they post bail and the state's only asking for $1? How does that all work? And what is the nuances of making sure that Luigi doesn't end up in Rikers and get remanded into state custody or something like that?
Sure. So I think the answer to the first question of why isn't Karen doing a bail petition is because she knows she's never going to get it. There's a difference between a judge being willing to hear the parties on a motion and the judge being willing to grant the relief that's requested. 0% chance Luigi is getting a bond in federal court. So I would imagine that that's the reason. Also, federal court is a bit different than state court, at least here in South Carolina. It's kind of like a one-shot deal. If you defer on the issue of bond at the initial arraignment, which most people do, you can petition the court for a bond at a later time, but it's a one and done. If you get told no at that bond petition, then there's no coming back unless typically you have a change in circumstance. So I think she's not asking for it because she knows how unrealistic it is. Now, if for some reason the federal case went away, then he would be remanded. He would no longer be in the custody of the United States Marshal Service. He would be remanded to state custody. I would imagine that would be in New York because they have the more serious charges. And then he would, like you said, he would go to Rikers. If that went away, then he would be remanded to state custody in Pennsylvania. I think that's the hierarchy there.
And so one of the questions I had as well is, didn't Karen Agnifilo basically ask, one, she made an appeal for, let's not have two cases, let's drop one of the cases. And it seemed to me that she asked actually to drop the state case and just go with the federal case, which people, and do you think that's right or not? Did I get that wrong and she wanted the state and drop the federal, or keep the federal and drop the state?
She wants to deal with the federal case first, because if you'll recall, there was some back and forth about whether the state case would proceed first and the federal case would follow. Karen, from what I understand, feels very strongly about that federal case going first. I understand why she feels that way. It's the more serious case. It's the death penalty eligible case. I am not familiar with her saying that she wanted them to drop. I mean, I'm sure she wants all of the cases dropped. But I was not aware that there was a question except for what order those cases would be called in. And she's very much in favor of the federal case going first.
So to break down where I think I heard that, is I thought that she made an argument, and this is going completely off of memory, that in a case like this, where there's both a state charge and a federal charge that is essentially the same thing, once one has made a ruling, there's really no reason for the other to continue on with it. So she's basically like saying, hey, let's just do the federal case. And when the federal government has settled it and we've made a decision, if it comes out a certain way and they're happy with the verdict, there's no reason to continue on with the state case because you already took care of one case. There's no reason to do it. It's just basically the same thing over again. That seemed to be the logic she was trying to use to the whole, let's just deal with one case and maybe drop the other one, because I think she said there's a precedent set that the state doesn't typically continue on with the pursuit if the federal government has already tried it.
Well, if the federal government's already gotten the conviction, but you best believe that if he, F around, find out, they get a not guilty in federal court, you best believe that the state of New York is going to be pursuing its state case. Now, if he's convicted in federal court, I can see the state not proceeding with their prosecution because he would have already been convicted in federal court. The only thing that's, a little hinky about that is until his appeals are exhausted in federal court, which in a death penalty case will take a small eternity, the state is not going to probably feel comfortable dismissing their case, knowing that there's a possibility that he may get some relief through an appeal. So they want to make sure that they've got a conviction and that it's going to stick before they agree to dismiss their case.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to ask you mentioned the whole okay, well, maybe Karen hasn't asked for bail because she knows there's really zero chance of that really happening. So let's talk about, just generally speaking, that for a second. If a person has no criminal history and has been a young, upstanding young man going to college and has no history of any kind of troublemaking, is it natural that all murder cases don't get bail, period? Or is it usually the case that if there's no reason to think you're going to flee the country and that you're an upstanding person, that you have a chance at bail? And is that also part of this problem of, one, they're just like, there's no way we're letting Luigi go in and run the risk of having him lose. Or they're going to play that card of, hey, he was found with $8,000 in his backpack and a passport, so he was planning on fleeing the country, so we're not going to let him. Like, under what basis are they saying he's ineligible to have bail and get out and fight this from home?
Sure. So in a bail or a bond proceeding, there are two factors for the judge to consider, and this is pretty universal across the board. It's the risk of flight, and it's the potential danger to the community. And the judge is not there to decide whether the person is guilty or not guilty of the underlying offense, but rather what are the two factors for consideration: risk of flight, danger to the community. Yes, I'm sure that they would argue that he was a flight risk because he supposedly evaded law enforcement for several days before he was captured, even though he knew they were looking for him. That's their position, not mine. Okay, and that he's an obvious danger to the community because they allege that he committed cold-blooded murder in broad daylight, on a busy city street. Now, in federal court, it's even more complicated than that because there is a statute that lays out what we call presumption cases, or cases that the potential sentence for which or the nature of the offense is so serious or is of a certain or meets a certain threshold that there is a presumption that no amount of bail can secure that person's release. And so in federal court, we fight against these presumption cases. Some cases are considered mandatory detention. Luigi's case would be one such case. That's why I say that it's gosh darn near impossible for him to get a bail. So it's a number of things. It's yes, you're right. He doesn't have a prior criminal history. Other than the two arguments for risk of flight and danger to the community that I know that the government would make, there's an argument that Karen A could make that he's neither of those things, and she could say why, but she's still going to be dealing with it being a mandatory detention case or a presumption case in federal court.
Fair. So yeah, these are questions that I get asked a lot, and I don't really know how to answer. So I'm glad that you've kind of weighed in and given us some professional opinions about how that would go. I want to give an opportunity before we even kind of remotely transition to some questions about Kohberger and some of the cases and nuances that I want to talk to you about that. To do two things. One, do you have anything about Luigi Mangione's case that you think would be of interest? And two, does our audience who are here on TikTok and YouTube have any questions related to Luigi before we kind of move into a little different case to talk about? So did you have anything, Ally, that you wanted to bring up about Luigi in particular?
I don't, but Karen A, if you're out there listening, file something. We're missing your amazing writing and your good motion skills. It's been so quiet on the Luigi front. I'm ready for some action.
I was kind of curious, now that you've mentioned, I'm kind of curious about this. So Thomas Dickey, of course, is the attorney in Pennsylvania. What was exactly Karen's huge document where she's talking about in detail the arrest in Altoona, Pennsylvania? I mean, I guess at the bottom line is, where's Karen's interest in the Altoona, Pennsylvania case when it's a different state and it's a different issue? But she weighed in heavily about the body cam footage and alleging that the officers were turning off the microphones and all kinds of stuff, which even Thomas Dickey didn't do. Like, I think Karen did a better job of making the argument why it was an illegal arrest than Thomas Dickey did. But fundamentally, why is she writing about opinions in the Altoona case when it's not a New York case?
Her stakes are a lot higher. She's got the more serious case, and all things stem from that. Not all things, but so much stems from that Altoona encounter. That's the first time that law enforcement made contact with Luigi. It's the first time they spoke to him. It's the first time that they got their hands on some of his possessions. And so much of what Karen is going to have to deal with in the trial in terms of what's admissible, what can be brought before the jury, what can be entered into evidence is going to stem from that Pennsylvania encounter. So I think she was really, really smart to focus in on that and to kind of go through it in such detail. It doesn't matter, and I'm not saying it doesn't matter to Dickey, but he doesn't have the more serious case. In the grand scheme of things, it's Karen who really needs to hone in on those things and focus on them, and I think that's exactly why she did that.
Right, and it seems fundamentally, and I'm going to get to a question on YouTube that's holding. I've got a user that's asked a question, so I want to make sure she knows. I'm going to get to you in just a second. But yeah, a lot of people are really, really interested in this case and how it's going to come out, and we're all waiting to know what the repercussions are going to be if the Altoona arrest was illegal and how much of the case is still left. And I've maintained all along the federal government is still going to try Luigi. They got plenty of. They're going to say they've got tons of evidence. They've tracked his movements. They know when he came into town. They know what he was there to do. They got him on camera. They don't need the gun and the manifesto and all this. So even if that gets all tossed out, they're going full bore ahead with prosecuting. But people are there's a lot of people who have the misconception that if that gets tossed out in Pennsylvania, Luigi walks, and there's just I don't think that's even possible. Somebody asked in YouTube, Neon asked in YouTube, what's the risk that Luigi gets moved to a more death-friendly state in the federal case? Can they move it to a more death-friendly state?
No, the district is the district. It's where the crime occurred.
And other people have asked things about, could it be moved out of New York proper, so it's not in New York City?
Southern District of New York will draw its jury pool from the Southern District of New York map lines.
You had made a comment too, and it's funny because I could be on Luigi all night long, but you had made a comment before, I think you said this, and I can't remember if you said it to me or if you said it in one of the videos I've watched of yours, something to the effect of, the federal government hardly ever swings and misses. If the government tries a case, they know they've got their case, right? Mm-hmm. How often do they fail? And does that essentially mean bad news for Luigi fans that if the government thinks that they've got him because they never fail? You know, what is your thought?
Yeah, so I think, okay, so first of all, the feds have, I think it is, they update these stats periodically, but I think at last check it was a 97% conviction rate.
Oh my
that
God.
Means that, yes, that 97% of indicted federal cases, whether they be trials or pleas, are convicted. Okay, so there's that. So that's a pretty big stat there. The other thing is that this is not a traditional federal case. I believe, and this is just, here's all the disclaimers, Ally opinion alert, that this case is only in federal court because this administration has a message to send on this particular issue, and they've chosen Luigi to kind of be the poster child for sending this message and reviving the death penalty. And so I think that the only reason the feds got involved in this case in the first place is so that they could seek the death penalty for Luigi. I think otherwise it would have been a very high-profile state case and nothing more.
Yeah.
And so in that regard, I think it's a little bit different because their level of preparation, I don't know if the U.S. Attorney's Office kind of accepted this begrudgingly because they're, instead of relying on their agents to do a year or 6 months or longer of an investigation before they bring charges, they're essentially relying on local law enforcement in New York City to kind of build this case. And so it's not traditional in that sense, but that 97% conviction rate is something to be.
And by conviction rate, does that mean they got something or they got what they went after? Like, for example, if they plea down to something lesser, do they still call that a conviction rate and they got the conviction even though they pled down?
Yes, that's anything but an acquittal.
Right. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, because I've maintained all along, my guess, and I'm, this is pure pulling this out of my ass, is that Luigi's probably not going to get the death penalty, but I feel unfortunately for those who support Luigi Mangione that he likely is going to get life in prison without the possibility of parole. And would that still be considered a conviction and a win for them, even though they went for the death penalty? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, all they really want is to make sure he never gets out again.
Yeah, so the conviction has to do with guilty or not guilty, not having to do with sentencing. I agree with you that I think it would be unlikely for a Southern District of New York jury to vote to put him to death, even if he was convicted. But that stat has to do with adjudication of guilt, meaning that person pled guilty to something in court under an indictment, or that person was found guilty by a jury. It has nothing to do with the sentence or the government getting the sentence it wants. A lot of that, anyways, is driven by the United States sentencing guidelines. Anyway,
I think you and I have speculated both that we think there's a fair chance that there's going to be a hung jury in this situation, and I would say there's a fair chance there could be more than one hung jury. And then the question is, how often are they going to try it until they just, if that goes that route, that would not be a conviction, and that would be one of their losses, right? Because they couldn't get a conviction. Now again,
well, it wouldn't be a loss. They would just have to retry it until they got a conviction or until they decided to dismiss the case.
Right, and if they dismiss it, they don't call that a loss, right? I guess.
Nope, it's just a dismissal.
Well, no wonder the number's at 97%.
That's right. Yeah, no kidding.
Any other questions, by the way, before we continue on with maybe some other general questions that may see if I can. How much are you up to date, by the way, on Idaho 4? Have you done any research at all? Have you had any casual interest? What is your knowledge level on the Idaho 4 case at all?
My knowledge level is I'm relying on you, Lee, for my information. So I listened to and read what you sent me, but admittedly, I'm not roll up my sleeves in the nitty gritty of it, but I generally know the story.
Fair. Okay. So let's kind of transition a little bit into that now, because I have some questions I want to ask. So first of all, and I hope I can word this right, because even I'm a little confused. When this happened, the murders happened in Moscow, Idaho, at a college campus, the University of Idaho. Allegedly, a student from WSU, which neighbors there about 12 miles away in Pullman, Washington. I went to school there, by the way, so I'm familiar with this, and I used to travel to Moscow all the time. In fact, a big part of this case has to do with what was Bryan Kohberger doing over in Moscow, Idaho? And I'm like, everyone goes to Moscow, Idaho. The two campuses intermingle constantly. So anyways, the point being is that allegedly Bryan Kohberger went over there and he killed 4 individuals at 4 o'clock in the morning ish. In a house of 6, he murdered 3 women and 1 male, left 2 survivors alive. The prosecution claims that they've got his car arriving at the scene at the house at 4:07 a.m., speeding away at 4:20 a.m., therefore putting the window of 4 murders on 2 floors of a 3-story home, happening in about a maximum of 13 minutes. After you factor getting out of the car and going into the house and all that, you've got about an 8 to 10 minute window realistically. Some people will argue that's totally enough time to kill 4 people who are apparently intoxicated and or sleeping. Other people say there's no way you could have done that. The most amazing part of the story is that Bryan Kohberger allegedly, and it's come out over and over again, that drug no DNA from any of the victims outside the house. There is no DNA from the victims outside of the house. So how do you keep that from happening? None got down the driveway, none got into his car, none was ever found in his house. There's nothing from any of the victims that ever made it even out of the house. That's part 1. Part 2, the only thing that's DNA related of Bryan Kohberger's in the house is a speck of trace DNA. They've argued in legal terms the difference between touch DNA and trace DNA, because the prosecution wants to use the word touch DNA to imply that he touched the knife sheath, the button snap on the knife sheath, whereas the defense is saying that's trace DNA. You don't know that it was touched. You don't know how the DNA got onto the snap. All of this is leading to several questions. I'm just setting up the basis. One of the things that comes up is there was an unprecedented, that was used all the time in the media, gag order that was put into place when this first happened. The judge not only said no one in the prosecution or the defense can talk about it, but also no one on behalf of the families can talk about it either, their attorneys or anything like that. And even the attorneys for one of the victims' families said, that's a violation of our First Amendment freedom of speech. We should be able to talk about our daughter, what happened to our daughter, and all these things. And generally, the families have their attorneys speak on their behalf. So, can you give us what your thoughts are on the whole gag order of does the attorneys usually get to go ahead and talk to the public during the trial, and what does the gag order usually cover? And was that unprecedented to say even the attorneys can't talk about the case, or what?
No, I don't think it's unprecedented to say attorneys can't talk about the case. The judge has a really difficult job in any high-profile case to kind of, manage the flow of information, to preserve the integrity of the jury, potential jury pool, and the investigation itself, and to kind of keep things tight while also balancing the interests of the public and knowing what's going on and having open access to what's happening in the courtroom. But in this case with a trial that hasn't started, I wouldn't say that it's unprecedented. I think it's unusual that the judge would try to extend that order to family members. I don't know that I agree that that's appropriate, nor is that enforceable. I mean, I don't know. I guess she would say, she has contempt powers, or he has contempt powers to enforce that. But typically it's just that lawyers should not be talking publicly to the media. And honestly, in a lot of cases, that is to preserve the defendant's ability to hopefully get a fair trial as well. Because you have to imagine that jury selection in a case like that, with as much attention as it's gotten, is going to be difficult as it is. If you've got a whole bunch of lawyers out there making statements, and you've got people talking about the case more than they already are in the media, people may place more weight on what the state is saying or what the defense attorney is saying, and then as soon as you get to the point of jury selection, you've got an even bigger problem than you otherwise would. So gag orders, we don't love them, but we also kind of understand why sometimes they're useful.
Now, from my perspective as a true crime follower and commentary guy, the whole gag order thing has only led to everybody having to make speculations about what happened, because they won't tell you anything that happened, right? And so we're left having to do breadcrumb thinking. Well, if this is the case and this was just filed, what does that mean? And even though we can't see the document, the fact that it's titled this means they're fighting over this, and we have to speculate all day long because they won't just tell us. Now, what happened was a new judge took over the case, and the newer judge, Stephen Hippler is his name, determined that the original judge had gone too far in the original gag order. And so he said, I'm going to go ahead and allow to reopen and unseal some of the documents that have been previously sealed. But, and slowly, so what's happened is after 2 years of it being under a gag order, all of a sudden we're getting flooded with documents that are being unsealed now, in part. Some of it's redacted, some of it's still under closure, but it's coming out more. So yay for Hippler for giving us that thing. But then what happened was, and I've got questions that are back further, but I got ahead of myself. So Dateline NBC just did a recent documentary on the case, now that we're about a month or so away from going to jury selection. And in that, they stated about 5 times on there that they had new information that's never been released to the public before. They mentioned the FBI several times as giving them information that has never been seen by the public before. And as I would say, the judge, in the best language I can say, lost his shit and said, someone has violated the gag order, and it's clearly from the prosecution or law enforcement, either formally in the case or currently in the case. Now, he didn't clarify what was said, but several new details came out that people like me were like, holy shit, when did that detail come out? And immediately Hippler had got pissed and said, and it was interesting, and it's super interesting because Hippler doesn't seem to really care hearing about anything about the defense. He seems really biased. But in this case, he said, someone from the prosecution or law enforcement leaked something. I need to know who it is. If you make any attempts to cover up who it is, I'll hold you in contempt of court. And the only way that we're going to have this problem not happen is to that there's going to be repercussions, civil or criminal repercussions, and I need names. And anybody who tries to cover it up, it was really strong language. And then in addition, he said, and by the way, you just cost Idaho a ton of money because now we're going to have a harder time finding an impartial jury. We may have to sequester the jury, so you just cost us a fortune. Anyways, this is the whole shitstorm that has come out of the gag order releasing. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that other than now the last thing I'll say about this is those people who, as we call them, guilters, who believe that Brian Koberger clearly is the guilt, are trying to say, oh, it was the defense that leaked that information because, of course, they want to make them look bad. But I'm like, if you look at the judge seems to give zero shits about even having this trial. He's already convinced Brian Koberger is guilty. For him to say it's the prosecution that leaked this and I want the prosecutors, or I want the name of the person in the prosecution, he didn't even give an option for this came from the defense. He knows it came from the law enforcement or the prosecution side. So I don't know. What do you think would happen in that case? Because one of the things that I guess here's a legal question for you. If it turns out that they can name a law enforcement insider, and there's the FBI is all over this. There's a guy, I keep thinking the defense has hinted at the name Nick Balance from the FBI over and over again as doing suspicious shit, and they've been naming him over and over again, hinting that they're going to say he did something shady in the whole investigation. If it turned out someone like that, a Nick Balance or somebody that's got a pivotal piece of testimony, and it turns out that they're leaking stuff to the press, and the judge finds out that they're leaking stuff to the press, can they testify anymore? I mean, is their whole testimony tossed out, anything that they were going to talk about because they're the leaker, or what? How do you deal with that?
Well, I mean, somebody about to be in trouble. The judge has some options there. Can hold them in contempt depending on the leak and the implications. The judge may make some decisions about evidentiary rulings, what can come in, what can't. I highly doubt that. Let's say they found out that it was the lead investigator in the case that ended up leaking information to the press. I would not see a judge saying that the lead investigator could no longer testify. But I mean, again, somebody is about to be in trouble, and even worse is going to be if they figure out who it was and they figure out that other people in that same agency knew about it, helped cover it up, helped facilitate it, or knew about it and took no action to discipline or to address the issue and kind of turned a blind eye to it, then that's going to be an even bigger problem. And then that's probably going to be where you're going to see a judge go ballistic, because not only is that just disrespect for a court order, but it potentially jeopardizes the fairness of the trial and the jury selection process generally.
Yeah, and I think, going back to the original gag order thing where I said that the gag orders seem to apply to the families in some regards, one of the family members in particular, who's gotten a lot of airtime. I mean, he literally goes on podcasts. He goes on every opportunity to be interviewed by the press. Steve Gonzalez, the father of Kaylee Gonzalez, one of the victims in the house, he's been, every time he goes on, and he goes on like to the Drunk Turkey Show on TikTok, I mean, or YouTube, like he just literally, everybody that will listen to Steve Gonzalez, he'll go on and talk about the thing. And he's indicated several times that I paid for the right to talk about what happened to my daughter, so I'm going to talk about it, kind of thing. And then he keeps giving hints that he knows things that hasn't been released, and he's like, wait till you see what comes out in court. You know, this is going to be no question that Bryan Kohberger's the guy. And then he'll leak all the time little details about the case. You know, he punched my daughter in the face. And like, well, that never came out. Nobody's ever said anything about that. So I think Steve's kind of exercised his right of, I have the right to talk about this case and what happened to my daughter, although he's talking about details that are under gag, like whether or not his daughter was punched in the face, or what type of wounds she received and stuff like that. And so how do you deal with the family member like that because where I'm going with that is the leak, I feel like has been leaking stuff. The same person who leaking to NBC Dateline is probably the same person leaking to Steve Gonzalez and telling them details about the case. How do you deal with the family member who's getting leaked information and can just run to the press, about that stuff?
Well, so the family member of a deceased victim can kind of, in a way, step into the shoes of that victim. And lots of states have Victims' Rights Act, and they have a right to certain information about the status of the case, updates, what the evidence shows. And so it's also possible that this particular father has met with the prosecution in an effort to get an update about the case and just doesn't give about the judge's order saying that you can't go and turn around and talk about these things. So I don't know that it's necessarily, I would characterize that, I don't know how it works in Idaho. I wouldn't characterize that if it was here in South Carolina as a leak, because that's the family of a deceased victim being entitled to certain information about the case. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get everything, but they have a right to be reasonably informed. But it sounds like he's just out there and saying, I'm going to say what I have to say, regardless of what the judge says. And at that point in time, the judge is going to admonish the prosecutor, and the prosecutor's office may say, listen, you've kind of shown that you're not willing to comply with the court's order, and so now we're not going to be able to share any additional information with you until we see that you can be in compliance with the court order.
Yeah, and it's difficult because I sympathize with the man, and as he said, he kind of paid for the right to be able to talk about it. But at the same time, it seems to be that he even thinks he's under some kind of gag order, because he said one time early in this investigation, right after the murders, he was interviewed, and he said, don't make me tell people. Why don't you, the media, step up and tell them what happened? Don't make me say it. I don't want to have to tell people what happened to my daughter. You be the man and be the alpha, he said, and tell people what happened. Don't make me say it. And so it made it feel like he knew a bunch of shit, but he's not allowed to say it. Now, I don't know if he just meant, I don't want to physically have to explain what happened to my daughter because it's too painful, or whether he meant literally, don't make me have to break the gag order and come tell you what happened because you guys won't cover it. Tell people what happened. So I don't know how to interpret that exactly. It may have just been he doesn't want to talk about it, but
that was my first thought. Maybe it's just he's saying, please don't put me through this. Don't make me be the mouthpiece. Right. You all do it.
So here's a nuance that I want to ask from a legality question that is really interesting. There's a group of people, myself even, who have a theory that Bryan Kohberger may have actually been involved. He's either the unluckiest. So first of all, the case is massively circumstantial. So he's either the unluckiest bastard in the world and just happens to have done a lot of wrong things at the wrong time, so it looks really bad from an outside perspective, but it's all unexplainable and he's just really unlucky. Or he was somehow involved. I still fundamentally myself, and a lot of people, feel like that he could have done that, killed four people on 2 floors in 8 minutes, gotten out of the house without leaving anything more than a speck of his own DNA in the house, tracking no blood out, which indicates to me that he would have happened to take clothes off inside the house and put it in a baggie or something like that to not track blood out. The officers who arrived on scene said it was such a bloodbath, they were gagging when they walked in. The smell was horrible. The survivors, by the way, didn't call 911 for over 7 hours. It was close to 8 hours, and said that they had no idea. They thought their roommates were just passed out. Yet the officers immediately couldn't handle the stench when they walked in the house. It was a bloodbath. So none of that makes sense to any of us. Where I'm going though with all that question is, so a while back, this is a 2-part question. A while back, the prosecution asked the judge, hey, the defense is going to try to say that there's another person who could have done this. which to me just means reasonable doubt. You're trying to say to the jury, somebody else could have done this, except for Brian Kohberger. But what the prosecution asked the judges, do not allow the defense to submit an idea that there was an alternate perpetrator unless they name a name or have. And I thought to myself, why should they have to name a name? Like, isn't the idea of reasonable doubt that somebody could have done it, but I have to tell you who it was? Having said that, very, very late in the game now, 2.5 years later, Ann Taylor, the lead defense, has said, we have a name. We've got a late tip. That's what she said. Now, in my opinion, and this is where I want your legal advice, it has to be a late tip, because if she's known about this for 2.5 years, he's going to be like, why the hell didn't you say something 2.5 years ago? So a late tip comes in, she says, and we need a little bit more time to vet it, but we do have a name, and we think it was more than one person, which a lot of us have thought it was more than one person that did it in the first place. Now, 2 questions. If Brian Kohberger was, say, a getaway driver, and he didn't actually go in the house, but other people did go in, and maybe he was involved in some place, how does it factor in for his trial that they say it's one guy, and he did it in 8 minutes, whatever, and then you find out that he was involved, but he didn't actually go in? That's part 1 of the question. Part 2 of the question is, shit, I lost the other part of the question. Let's deal with that one right now. So if he's an accomplice to murder, but they're trying to say you're the only guy who did it, and there are other people that they named and whatever, how does that change his trial?
Sure. So again, not knowing what the law is in Idaho, in South Carolina, we have a legal concept called the hand of one is the hand of all. And it means that the person who is participating in any crime or is there and does not stop it is just as liable for the crime as the person who pulls the trigger or sticks the knife in someone. And so, depending on what the law is, he could be just as liable even if he was the getaway driver, if he participated in any way or conspired with other people, knowing that this was going to be the outcome, or maybe even, again, depending on what the law is. Here, if you go into a house and you intend to steal something from somebody, it goes bad, somebody starts fighting you and you kill him, that's still murder, even though it wasn't premeditated.
And that's where I was going to go with the next question, and maybe it's getting a little bit off the rails, but that was the next question I was at. What if, for example, someone said, hey, can you drive me to this house because, so-and-so owes me money and I'm going to go in and get my money? He has no idea it's going to turn into a murder scene, and then all of a sudden, is he just as guilty for murder because murder was committed in the act of a crime, or would that be different for him, that he thought it was just a simple robbery and people ended up getting killed and he's like, oh shit, I got to get out of here?
Well, if he thought it was a robbery and people end up getting killed, he's liable here. Now, if he thought he was just giving somebody a ride somewhere to go, pick up a plate of food or go, drop something off, and then all of a sudden somebody gets killed, that's different, because it's about what he understood, what he participated in, what was there a conspiracy among the parties. The other thing too, just kind of going back to your original question, talking about not being able to mention that it must have been someone else. We have a concept here called third-party guilt. We are not allowed to raise, if I were to try a murder case and say it wasn't us, it had to have been someone else. We're not allowed to do that unless we have proof, tangible proof, that that person must have been involved or must have committed the crime. You can't just say it had to have been another guy. It's called raising the issue of third-party guilt, and judges don't allow it. That's
super interesting, because it seems to me fun. I mean, this is great. This is why we have an attorney on, right? Because it seems to me that reasonable doubt means if anyone else could have done it, then you have to reasonably question whether or not it was my guy that did it. So why would you have to name a name and prove who did it if all you need is reasonable doubt to say any 12 other people, and it doesn't matter who their names are, any 12 other people could have done it, so therefore you can't say definitively it's my guy?
Because there's a difference between it wasn't me and somebody else must have done it. Now, that kind of seems a little silly, right? Because if it wasn't you, it happened, somebody else had to have done it.
Right.
But the distinction is, you can say there is doubt that I am the person that convicted this crime. The state has not proved beyond a reasonable doubt that I am guilty of committing this crime. There's a difference between making that argument, which very much relies on the concept of there being reasonable doubt as to whether this person is guilty, and saying, I didn't do it, but I know that there's this other guy that had to have done it, and let me tell you why, without proof and without being able to specifically point to someone. That's the concept of third party.
So how strong does that proof have to be? Like for example, I mean, if they had enough proof, they could try somebody else. But did they have to have enough proof that they could actually throw somebody else in jail, or just enough proof that it looks really, really strongly possible that it was somebody else?
Yeah, so it just has to be some evidence. It'll be up to the judge to decide whether it's sufficient or not, but it's not like the person has to raise, sufficient evidence to constitute probable cause for an arrest, or, sufficient evidence to convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. Like that's not the defendant's job to do the prosecution's work. It's just that they have to present some evidence, and then it will be up to the judge to decide whether it's sufficient in order for that person to be able to raise the issue of third-party guilt.
And to be fair, that's exactly how Hippler basically phrased it. When Ann Taylor said, hey, look, we do believe we have a name, he basically calmly said, okay, then I need you to, by such and such a date, provide me what evidence you have on who it is and what you've got. So, he was like, okay, I'll hear the idea of an alternate suspect. But again, it's going to be a problem if they knew about this guy early on. Her argument basically is, and it's true, they've had something like 37,000 tips come in on the thing with all kinds of crazy conspiracies involving drug conspiracies and a million different things. It was a drug hit, it was something else. But here's another nuance. Now, I hope I can explain this to you. Let's say so early on when Brian Kohberger was arrested, one of the very first things he allegedly said, people argue all the time about whether or not this was documented or not. On his arrest, he allegedly said, has anybody else been arrested for this? And people have taken that to be Kohberger was involved with other people, and he wants to know if anybody else other than himself has been picked up, because he knew there was other people involved, and said, has anybody else been picked up on this? Now, going on that theory, let's say, so Ann Taylor has fought like tooth and nail to try to get the death penalty taken off the table, and it's just failing. Every single time Hitler's like, nope, death penalty's on the table, and it's going to stay on the table. Now that we're approaching trial and we're very close to trial, all of a sudden Ann Taylor has a new tip. Is it possible, and how would this work, if the attorney Ann Taylor had no idea that all this time her client has been sitting on, I know somebody else did it because I was with somebody else, and I wasn't going to say anything about it until it got to the point that you can't get the death penalty removed, and this is my bargaining chip. It's not a plea deal, I know there was somebody else there, and he tells her. Is that still going to be a problem? Because technically, the attorney and her client are one, and therefore if Brian Kohberger knew about it 2.5 years ago and didn't say anything, they can't bring it in? Or can Ann Taylor say, my client didn't tell me about this until yesterday, so for me it's brand new, and so it's a new tip that I'm just finding out about?
I'm trying to figure out why it's an issue that they can't raise it at any time that they want to. It's not their burden to prove themselves innocent. And unless it's something like an alibi defense, there shouldn't be any time requirement for when that has to be disclosed. If that's the theory of their case, the defense is not required to reveal its strategy or its theory of the case to the state. At least not in my state. We can kind of keep that, again, unless it involves an alibi, we can keep that to ourselves until the time of the trial. Now, the rules of procedure may be different in other states, but I'd be curious to kind of figure out why the time frame would even be an issue, and why it matters when they knew. Well, if that's going to be their defense, then that's their defense.
This is awesome, because this is showing where my ignorance in the law comes, because I always kind of thought the discovery process was a two-way street, that not only does the prosecution have to tell the defense what they have, but the defense has to tell what they've got on the other side, and that both sides go in knowing what the whole thing is going to be. So you're almost making it sound like the defense doesn't have to tell the prosecution if they think there's another person or they have evidence of another person. Is that not true? They don't have to divulge that?
Not in my state.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
We get to do trial by ambush in South Carolina. The state's got to turn everything over to me. I cannot have any surprises. If I show up to trial and there's a surprise, that means there's been a discovery violation. But if I surprise them, that means I'm being a good lawyer.
So in theory, this could have been a tip that they've known about and have been kind of working on or thinking about for 2 years, but just haven't decided to pull the string on. But now that it's getting trial date, they're saying, okay, now we're gonna let you know we do have another name. And I mean, I'm trying to figure out why Ann Taylor's waiting until a few weeks, a month before trial to say, hey, we do know we have a suspect that we think, and that was more than one person.
Yeah. It also makes you wonder, too, if they really thought there was this other person that was responsible for these murders, they would have been investigating that independently this entire time. They would have wanted to get on it as soon as possible so that they were as prepared as possible to present it. So that kind of tells me, the fact that they have waited tells me that they probably have not known about it or been able to kind of verify some of the details of it, because to me, as a defense lawyer, the sooner you get started, the better. The more I can outwork the state or the prosecution in any case, the better off that I feel like I'm going to be. And part of that is being more prepared than the other side, knowing the evidence better, and having a handle on my own strategy and theory of the case. And so to think that they have been sitting on this just because doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because, if it really was a credible tip or a credible lead, if I'm that defense lawyer, I want to have had my investigator out there talking to this person or looking into things. I will have done my work already.
Yeah, and and whether or not she was lying or I heard it wrong, mm-hmm. she did seem to indicate it was a new tip that she had. She said we've discovered a new lead and a new tip, and we need a little bit more time to suss it out, kind of thing. So she indicated it wasn't something they've been sitting on or working on for some time. It was something that was kind of and I suspect, pure conjecture, there's been rumors about this for forever. Maybe somebody came by that gave the actual meat to one of the rumors that's been out there for forever, and now she has a new piece of okay, we've known about it and we thought about it, but until recently we didn't have the smoking gun, and now we have something we can put our teeth into.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between theories, conspiracy theories, and somebody actually coming to you with something that you can actually look into, or like you said, sink your teeth into.
Yeah. So, any questions from the peanut gallery? I mean, I probably have a million questions, but again, I know you don't know the case as well, and what I don't want to do is I don't want you to. Well, there is another case. There is another thing that you and I talked about briefly: investigative genealogy, genetic genealogy work. So, in this case, this is the craziest thing, and I hope that I'm going to get this right. Early on in the case, and for 2 years, people have been saying, well, of course Kohberger did it. His DNA is at the scene. And again, I reiterate for the millionth time, the only DNA is a speck, they said, of DNA the size of a grain of sand, that's how small it is, of trace DNA or touch DNA on the button snap of a knife that was left behind. So it seems like, and here's where it gets really crazy. So Othram Laboratory was a DNA kind of research lab that was helping basically try to develop a profile on the DNA and see who it was. For over a month, they couldn't come up with a hit. They tried. The best they could do was the DNA matched 4 brothers, none of them which had the last name Kohberger. And here's where it gets super weird. The FBI said, let us take over the work from Othram. And they then, after they took over, came up with Brian Kohberger's name and said, the guy you're looking for is Brian Kohberger. So the defense is asking, what did the FBI do to the DNA? Because the sample size doubled when the FBI took over. They doubled the size. In addition, there was this weird thing where the FBI was supposedly law or ethics prohibit the law enforcement for going into certain genealogy databases like Ancestry.com. There's some that law enforcement are kind of allowed to and ethical to go into, but other ones they're not. And the user agreements tell people, hey, when you submit your DNA here, you're not submitting it to the police, you're not submitting it to investigation. Well, the FBI went and searched those non-authorized databases to make a connection to Kohberger. So the defense said that was kind of illegal. And then people said, well, it wasn't illegal, it just was maybe unethical, but nobody's going to jail for what they did. They just maybe shouldn't have done it. I guess what I want to talk to you about is, you and I about a case where EMTs transferred DNA from one scene to another scene, and then all of a sudden somebody gets convicted for a murder they didn't do because, well, their DNA's there. And Hitler's famous words when Ann Taylor was trying to argue the DNA, he said, "Isn't DNA every day of the week and twice on Sunday?" And and people have been quoting him forever. It's a snappy line. It was awesome. But what is your feeling about touch trace DNA profiles, and all that?
It's crap. I wish, as my friend, I saw Sean Kent was in here earlier. I wonder if he dropped out. He would
he was in the live? Oh.
He was in here. Okay, he's gone.
Damn it.
I wish he was in here. Touch DNA is crap, okay? Touch DNA is everywhere. It's in the air. It's floating around. You can transfer it from person to person. It can sit on a surface. It can transfer from one surface to the next. It can hop across town, just like that case I was telling you about where there was a homeless man who went to the hospital. An EMT transported him to the hospital, and that EMT had also been to a murder scene and transferred the DNA of the murder victim to this homeless man who went to the hospital, and this homeless man ended up getting charged with that murder because they found the victim's touch DNA all over him. As it turns out, the EMT is the one that transferred it. Now, I have some questions about why that EMT wasn't washing his damn hands, but that's another issue. But that just goes to show you how easily it can be transferred and how unreliable touch DNA is when there's no other type of DNA like blood or semen or saliva or something like that to tie a person. A touch DNA just means that their DNA was there. It doesn't mean that they were there, and it doesn't mean that they touched that surface. It's not a fingerprint. It's not a blood droplet. All it means is that at some point in time, their DNA was floating in the air and it happened to land there. We don't know how long it was floating in the air, from whence it came, or how long it's been there. And so if that's all they got,
here's the oddity of it. And again, I'm hoping that I get this right. This case the narrative in this case has changed so many times in 2.5 years. It's nuts. But one of the things that drives me even bonkers is that they started to fight. The defense and the prosecution started to fight before the judge about the investigative genealogy work and how it was done and how the FBI developed the profile. And essentially, the prosecution came to this statement, basically. I'm going to summarize. You know what? We don't even intend to use the DNA in the thing. So how we got the profile doesn't matter. We're going on. The FBI gave us a tip of Bryan Kohberger's name, and the DNA really isn't necessary. So we don't need to fight that out in court. Now, the thing that's funny about that is, to this day, almost everyone who believes Bryan Kohberger is guilty says it based on that. Well, yeah, he's guilty. His DNA was at the scene. And I'm like, the prosecution doesn't even plan on talking about the DNA because I think they know that how they got the DNA profile was sus, and they don't want to have to argue about it in court. So now they're just trying to say, let's just ignore the fact that his DNA. It's like, how do you both simultaneously say his DNA was at the scene, that's why we're going to get him, but we're not going to talk about how we got his DNA at the scene?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a huge problem. I think the reason they're probably backpedaling on that now is that they know how unreliable and how insignificant touch DNA is. And yes, there's a difference between relying on that in order to go a step further in your investigation. But if I'm the defense lawyer, I'm raising that issue so loud, and I'm going to keep repeating it until somebody hears me or until the judge makes a ruling, that if that was good enough for them to go and pursue getting a warrant against somebody, and then they turn around and they're not going to then use it in the case, it's because they know that it's crap.
Yeah. And again, though, it's one of those things that leaves you to is Bryan Kohberger the unluckiest bastard in the world? Because they've got this idea that, his phone lost cell communication a couple hours before the murders and then regained cell communication after the murders were over, that he's seen on camera leaving Pullman, Washington a couple hours before the murders, seen coming back to Pullman, Washington shortly after the murders, that his car supposedly pings off a cell tower within 100 meters of the house 20 times over the last few weeks. All of that is super circumstantial. He has a million reasons to go to Idaho, including he has an ATM. He takes money out of a bank in Idaho. But anyways, it's like, how unlucky are you if all of that is just completely random chance, but they need to pin it on somebody and they gotta... Anyways, there's a lot of nuances to the case. I can't break down to you all the holes in the thing, but it's a fascinating case because every part of it is just very, very, very circumstantial. And they're trying to just put together a mountain of circumstantial evidence to say it has to be this guy. And I don't know, is that enough? That if you just, does a jury get convinced by there's no way you can't have that much circumstantial evidence on somebody and it not be true?
It could be, death by 1,000 cuts for him,
right?
At a certain point in time.
There was a question or two in here that I'm trying to see. Someone said, why do you think that things are being sealed? Some people think that there's an informant, and that's kind of hard for me to bring Ally up to speed. There's been rumors. So oddly, I'll try to make this brief, but if it gets super confusing, let's just ditch this. So Ann Taylor, before she was doing this, she actually had defended a couple of parents of the victims in drug cases. And there's a and when I first heard this, I thought, how is she even able to how is this not a conflict that she had? So Xana Kernodle, for example, Xana Kernodle was one of the victims. She represented Kara Kernodle in a drug case. Now, where it gets really weird is there's allegations.
People's parents are way more wild than mine.
Right. There's allegations that the family members in these drug cases turned state's evidence and turned against a famous drug group called the Fetty Brothers, and that they went to prison because the parents had turned them in. And that this was a retaliation against their daughters, killing their daughters for turning them in. Now, I don't know why they wouldn't just kill the people who actually informed on them, but people are saying, well, it hurts more that you kill their daughters than them themselves. So there's this whole grand conspiracy about, is there is there something going on? Do they know that there was an informant, that they, they had a plea deal, they turned in state's evidence against somebody, and that maybe law enforcement wants to cover up what's really going on, this big, huge drug conspiracy, and they know that it was a retaliation hit kind of thing. I don't know. You have any? I know you don't know a lot about the case there to know, but what are your gut feelings on?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that's the wildest thing I've ever heard. Of course, shout out to my now, I'm from New York originally, but my now home state of South Carolina, where the very infamous Alec Murdaugh murder happened. I mean, the theory in that case was that Alec Murdaugh was laundering money for a local drug cartel called the Cowboy Cartel, and that the reason Maggie and Paul Murdaugh were murdered was because he owed them money, and they were running drugs using private planes. And actually, a lot of people still think that, and so it wouldn't be the wildest theory. So right. I mean, I hear you, but at the same time, it's a murder case versus a potential drug case, and so that would require so many layers, I think, of corruption that it would almost be, I don't want to say hard to believe. I mean, truth is stranger than fiction sometimes, but I mean, it's an interesting theory. Well, I'd like to read more about it. To further support the theory, here's the argument.
Supposedly, law enforcement had been working on a big drug operation in the area for quite some time, and it would be damaging. It would destroy these college towns. Pullman, Washington, and Moscow, Idaho survive only because of the universities. If all of a sudden nobody in America wants to send their kids to these colleges because there's a massive drug problem that's rampant in the area, so there's argument to be made that law enforcement is trying to cover up because they want to take care of the problem first before admitting they have a problem. They want to be able to say, hey, look, there was a drug problem here, but we fixed it, we've taken care of it, whatever. So there are a lot of people who are uncovering leads that there's some kind of long-term drug investigation in the area, that law enforcement has maybe one of the girls that survived, Dylan Mortensen, for example, she might be a confidential informant that they're protecting and allowing her bullshit story about I saw a guy with bushy eyebrows, and because she's an insider and they don't want to give up their sources. So I don't know. It gets super convoluted. It's a deep ass rabbit hole, and it's only one. There's so many crazy conspiracy theories, and by crazy I want to say all of them actually have some credence. I mean,
yeah, that's what makes a good conspiracy theory.
Right. Right. There's really good ones, including. Oh my gosh, I uncovered one today that was so nutbaggish that I don't want to repeat it right now. But anyways, there's just a lot of crazy conspiracy theories. And it would be cool if you've got a full-time job and you've got other things you got to do. But if you get boned up on the case, I'd love to get some more of your insights when you get some of these crazy conspiracy theories. There was as a quick example of the one that I've been following a lot. There was an individual by the name of Brent Kopacka. Interestingly enough, he has BK as his initials. Brent Kopacka was an Army veteran in the 82nd Airborne. He was an elite not special forces, but elite forces paratrooper. He was staying in Pullman, Washington, and there was many people who thought he was the guy that did it. He was trained in knife fighting as an elite forces. He had a standoff a month and 1 day after the murder of the Idaho 4 with police, and was shot and killed at 4 a.m. in a standoff. And a lot of people have thought that he was related. And in fact, his phone was factory wiped. According to his family and his best friend, after law enforcement got done, his phone was factory wiped. And they said, why the hell was his phone factory wiped? All kinds of conspiracies going on now where people are saying, uh-oh, I lost Allie. You're completely gone. Are you still there?
Here.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
Anyways, so a lot of people have been asking questions about Brent Kopacka and whatever. And then today when I was doing my research, and again, I don't want to get nutbaggish with this, but the lead of the entire team for the Idaho investigation is a rookie cop who'd only been on the case, only been a cop for 2 years. He was in the 82nd Airborne in the same division, in the same battalion, in the same subgroup as Brent Kopacka, and he's the guy that found the knife sheath at the scene. Now, Ann Taylor has already hinted more than once, we believe that the knife sheath was planted, that they're not arguing that Brian Kohberger's DNA might be on it. They're saying what you don't know is how it got there. How did the knife get in the scene? Originally, police walked the scene down and didn't find a knife. Brett Payne came onto the scene an hour or so later, and he finds the knife sheath. It's easy to say why.
It sounds like O.J. Simpson,
right?
Love from Furman.
It reeks of that again. And again, I'm not trying to say that's what happened, but what got weird to me is when I realized that these guys both came from the very same specific 82nd Airborne paratrooper group, the same group. Not necessarily, there's no proof that they served together, but their years of service can overlap. It certainly does, and they were both in Afghanistan. So the question becomes, is there some kind of weird connection? And here's the thing that was weird about that. his best friend, Brent Kopacka, who was shot and killed, his best friend said, I think what happened that night. So what happened is they were called to the scene because Brent Kopacka was having problems with PTSD and had told his roommates that he was going to kill them if they didn't leave the apartment that he was staying at. So they called the police and said, hey, our roommate's going nuts. He's threatening to kill us. A standoff happened for about 7 hours, I think, and they ended up shooting and killing him in the morning before students started going on to campus. They decided they needed to end the thing. And Darren Duncan, his best friend, said, I think what happened that night is law enforcement believed that Brent Kopacka was involved with the Idaho 4 murders, and they were a little overzealous, and they shot him, and then they realized they fucked up, and then they wiped his phone to try to cover things up. And I thought, holy shit, could something like that have happened? But then you have to go down the rabbit hole. Are you going to frame somebody else for something they didn't do because you shot the wrong guy? Or was Bryan Kohberger and Brent Kopacka friends? And here's where it gets super weird. I'm dropping a million things on you. Their families both come from Pennsylvania. Bryan Kohberger comes from Pennsylvania. Brent Kopacka's family comes from Pennsylvania. Some people have placed them in the same town at the same time in Pennsylvania, and now they end up in the same town within 2 miles of each other in Pullman, Washington, which is the middle of frickin' nowhere. So all these coincidences, again, like I said, there's a million conspiracy theories out there, and they all have some meat, enough that you're going, what the hell? What do I believe in this case? There's just so many crazy leads.
That's wild.
I don't know what to think. Somebody's asking, would love to hear her thoughts about the judge calling Cy Ray a conspiracy theorist and not allowing him to testify. All right, so I will try to break this. I don't know how much time we have, but let me try to break this down. So,
okay.
A lot of the case revolves around timing advance records from AT&T. So what happened is the FBI says we have traced Bryan Kohberger's phone. We know he was traveling towards the crime scene and after the crime scene, and they're doing all these things like that. So what happened was, in rebuttal, the defense says, we want to bring in Cy Ray. Now here's the interesting about Cy Ray. Cy Ray literally wrote the book on advanced timing records. He teaches the FBI. He teaches all law enforcement. He is not only an expert, he's the expert in timing advance records. Now there's a super weird thing that came out, is basically Hitler dismissed him and said, well, I don't really care to hear Cy Ray's conspiracy theories. And he's like, this isn't a conspiracy theory. I literally taught these people how to do timing advance records, and what I'm telling you, Cy Ray said, is they're lying about the timing advance records. And here's, I don't know if you're going to follow this. This is super weird. So it turns out that AT&T, as a matter of course, back when the murders happened, did not generally turn over to law enforcement the timing advance records, which to be clear, shows that where you were when it pinged off of a cell tower, and then where you were 30 seconds later, for example, when it pings off a cell tower, so you can get directional information. What direction were you traveling? So the defense is saying Bryan Kohberger was out and about that night driving around, but he was stargazing and he wasn't going to Moscow, Idaho. And if you look at the timing advance records, you'll see he was going in the opposite direction. He wasn't going to Moscow, Idaho. He was going the opposite direction. The law enforcement want to say nope, and no timing advance records exist, so we can't really prove what direction he was going in. We just have pings. Cy Ray comes in and says, that's bullshit, you do have the timing advance records. And then, get this, so the prosecution's response is, at the time that the murders happened, AT&T did not have a habit of turning over timing advance records to law enforcement, therefore we couldn't have obtained them. And Cy Ray said, I know you did obtain them, because I've got the email that talks about the FBI requesting it, and AT&T gave it to the FBI. So they're trying to lie and say, they keep holding to their guns. AT&T doesn't give timing advance records during those dates. And he's like, but I can prove that they did get it to you. And so the fact that you're not showing us the timing, that's exculpatory information for Bryan Kohberger. You need to show us the timing advance record. So that's a crazy fight going on.
Yeah, that's wild. And he's got receipts, it sounds like.
It sounds like. He hasn't directly said it, but he basically said, I know how this works. And he said, basically what he said, to try to boil it down, is I can tell by what he's shown us already that he has the timing advance records. So I know how this works, and he couldn't have told us what he has told us if he didn't have timing advance records. So now I have to wonder why you're lying, saying you don't have timing advance records, because I know you do. And he supposedly had an email that verifies that they had asked for, the FBI had asked for the timing advance records, and AT&T probably would have given it if the FBI had asked for it.
Wow.
Crazy.
Yeah, that is.
That's a lot to chew on, isn't it?
So he's saying he's not going to allow him to be called by the defense as an expert in rebuttal because he says he's a conspiracy theorist? Yeah, at first Hitler dismissed it and said he didn't see any reason for Cy Ray to come in. He didn't want to hear about Hitler does not sound like he wants to hear anything the defense has to say. And he kind of blew it off as a conspiracy theorist. But what happened was, and I forgot what they called it, Cy Ray wrote
some kind of affidavit or vouching of his credentials, and that's where he laid out, I'm not just an expert. I am the expert. Yeah. I taught these guys how to do this. In fact, the FBI uses his software. He designed software that the law enforcement, including the FBI, uses to do advanced timing. He wrote that software. So after Hippler saw that, he kind of softened and said, okay, well, maybe Cy Ray can come in on a Zoom call and testify if something comes up where the advanced timing records is going to be fought about in court. So Cy Ray is now kind of a little bit on the maybe he can come in if the prosecution opens that door for the advanced timing records.
It also kind of makes you wonder if the judge is already planning on issuing some type of a motion in limine or pretrial ruling to keep some of that out, to where it makes him then not necessary as a rebuttal witness.
And that's exactly what it looks like. He's trying to make it so that, and the prosecution is trying to make it so that it's not a critical part of their investigation, so that they don't have to have that fought out and shown in court where they got the advanced timing records.
Yeah, they don't want to get caught with their pants down. So It sounds like somebody's lying about something there.
Yeah. Well, this has been a lot, and I don't want to keep you forever because I know you probably have to get up early in the morning. That's a good thing. I want to give a chance for the audience to ask a few more questions, if you don't mind. Let's see. Is there any more questions before Ally takes off for the evening? I saw a small content creator say he believed that Demetrius had BK's sheath. We know Brian was buying it from Emma and Demetrius, so that's believable. Alexander, that's a great comment, way beyond, I think, this conversation with Ally, unfortunately. To even explain to her who Demetrius is and who Emma is, and also that would be way too much, I think, for tonight. So super great question. Don't want to dismiss that. I don't think I want to have to try and even explain that to her right now, but that's a great question. Let's see if anything else is in here.
Great name, by the way. Ally, short for Alexandra.
He's passionate about what he does. He gets into it. I think somebody was talking about me. I put a lot of piss and vinegar and shit. So, yeah. So I mean, there's a lot to this case. I'm really curious to see how it's going to come out. But the main thing, like I said, is I really kind of wanted to delve into that idea that now the defense is saying, yeah, we think there's and by the way, just as an FYI, this gets overlooked by a lot of people. The defense brought in, and it was almost like a footnote. They brought in an expert who has written over 20 books in criminal forensics investigations, and he specializes in femicides, so homicides against women. And in it, he stated his professional opinion was that this crime was committed by more than one individual using more than one weapon. And that blew a lot of people away, because there's been a lot of people like me who said, I don't think that was done by one person. I think that the attack happened on 2 floors at the same time. And another thing that I've been maintaining, because the gag order, we have to make guesses, transfer DNA would explain everything, right? If one killer kills somebody on floor 2 and then moves up to floor 3, he's going to transfer DNA from the first crime scene up to the second crime scene, but none of that crime scene would be down at the first. So you'd know what order the killings. We're still to this day arguing about what order the victims were killed in, and I'm like, it shouldn't be a question, because transfer DNA, if it's one, that cross-contamination, I guess is the word. Cross-contamination would tell us what order they were killed in, because I can't see any scenario in which the killer can kill 2 people in one room and not bring any of that DNA into the other crime scene on the next floor. But we don't seem to have any evidence.
Unless he ran back and forth between the 2 scenes, but yeah.
Right, yeah, I guess, I mean, and it's still, like, I've mentioned this a million times too, the whole trace DNA with 1 speck of DNA, and nothing from the victims leaving the house. I've pointed out, we, as human beings, shed 30 to 40,000 skin cells every minute. So if he's changed out of clothes inside the house so that he didn't track blood out of the house, how was his skin cells not all over the house? Like, there's just a million questions. I don't even know how anybody in any scenario, even if there was more than one killer, doesn't leave DNA at the scene like that.
So how do they place him in the home at all? Just the
DNA is it. And get this, by the way, I don't know if you know about this. Oh gosh, two other male DNAs were found in the house. A blood spot on a banister on the lower floor was found, tested as unknown male B DNA that they haven't ever figured out who it is, and a glove with blood inside the glove was found outside of the house, unknown male D. And to this day, they say they don't know who they are. They don't have a match for them. It's not Brian Koberger's. It's not any of the victims. But, oh, never mind, it's not related to the crime scene. And I'm like, how do you rule out that there's not possible other people in the house that if you've got unknown? And the answer is, well, it's a party house. There's all kinds. There's DNA of everyone in that house. It's a party house, has been a party house, whatever. But that's been highly suspicious. And there's this whole argument about, oh well, an officer thought you could only run one profile into CODIS, and they ran Bryan Kohberger, so he was afraid if they ran the other DNA into CODIS, it would wipe out Kohberger's DNA, so they didn't test the other DNA. Bottom line is, everyone wants to know, why are we not talking more about the other blood that's left at the scene of two different males, unknown male B and D, that's left at the crime scene? And why we're all focused on, well, we don't need to look at any other DNA. We got Bryan Kohberger's DNA in the knife sheath, and that's good enough. So I don't know.
Yeah, they get that confirmation bias, that tunnel vision. Once they decide who their suspect's going to be, they kind of bend the evidence to make it fit their suspect instead of allowing the evidence to speak for itself and lead them in a different direction. And unfortunately, I feel like that's not unique to this.
And the weird part about it, again, not to keep you too much longer, but Bryan Kohberger allegedly has autism spectrum disorder, so he's a little flat. He has a flat affect. He doesn't present well, and so the defense is like, look, the jury needs to know that he's on the spectrum, because they're going to look at him and see his emotions not looking normal, and they're going to say that he's guilty because he just looks that way, and he does. He looks a little flat. Does that mean that the eyes of a killer, as everybody's going to say, or does he just not know how to respond to situations like normal human beings do? So again, is this the unluckiest bastard in the world? His professor at DeSales University wrote the book on BTK, and there's people who think that he did these murders as an ode to BTK to prove to his professor that he could get away with crime. He was a criminology student, and too much for one night. But I would love to have you come on again sometime when I have some more meaty legal type questions to ask you in the case. And
for sure.
Yeah.
What's the timeline? I think you mentioned jury selections coming up. What's their timeline? And do you think it's going to get pushed back?
Yeah. So get this. Oh my God, get this. James Patterson. You're aware of the novelist James Patterson?
Oh yeah, you said he's coming out with a book like right before.
He's coming out with a book on the Idaho 4 14 days before they are supposed to start seating the jury. So the trial's supposed to start in August. Jury selection is supposed to start, I think, end of July. Patterson's book comes out mid-July. So that's where we're at. And yes, they've asked for a continuance. The defense has asked for a continuance, saying in light of the leak that came out, in light of everything, we need to postpone the trial date. And basically, they're trying to pull a maneuver of basically saying, if you remove the death penalty, we'll go to trial right now. But if you're going to keep the death penalty on the table, we have a higher standard to prove, and therefore we need more time with all these leaks that came out. So either proceed with the trial on the timetable we have now and remove the death penalty, or postpone it. And Hippler has said, we're not postponing this trial over and over again. We're not So again, they can't tell the judge what to do, but they're trying to make the argument, hey, pick your choice. Remove the death penalty and proceed on your schedule, or postpone this because it's not fair for Bryan Kohberger anymore. So
interesting. What do you think the judge is going to do?
I think he's going to stay on schedule. I think because he was adamant so far that he wants to, but again, Hippler looks like he's bored when the defense talks. He's always leaning like he just looks like he's checked out. But man, he looked hot. He didn't look hot in legal terms. He was hot on that leak. Who the frick leaked this? I want their ass. And if anybody tries to cover it up, I'm going to hold you in contempt of court. So I think he's pissed that they just jeopardized the entire case. So my guess is, if he really believes that the whole case could be jeopardized, then maybe he'll be forced to postpone a little bit in order to keep the presumption of a fair trial, because he's pissed. And maybe he's pissed because this is fucking up his timeline and he wanted to freaking go camping in the winter.
He's probably got a lot of pressure too. He's got a docket to move, and I'm sure this case is front of mind for whoever calls the shots in Idaho too.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, I just wanted to let you know, I have seen tonight several people have asked to come up on the live. When I have a guest in particular, I tend not to take people from the audience up on the live. I've had too many weird things happen. I've seen too many things where people are trolls and they come up and they say shitty things and it just derails everything. So especially when I have a guest, I don't want to have anybody come up. And I also usually don't have anybody come up unless I've talked to you enough that I know that you're a decent human being and you're not going to be a troll. So I apologize. How's that?
I said, not the trolls.
Oh gosh, the trolls. Don't feed the trolls. It's horrible. But anyway, so I do appreciate that people have been sending requests, but I didn't tell you, but I'm not taking any guest people on there. I just had to confirm with TikTok that we're still alive. So I think that's good for now. I really, really appreciate, Ally, that you come on and you spend the time to do this. I know you were busy today, and you're busy every day probably. That you take the time to do this is amazing. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks so much for having me. This has been fun, and I promise to read up a little so we can talk more about it in the future, especially as the trial gets closer. That'll be fun.
Yes, it will, for sure. And I would love to, I'd love to be able to pick your bones on, once we figure out what some of those alternative theories have meat and what don't have meat as we approach trial. We'll really be able to, because there's a million of them, right? So let's see if we can put some meat on some of them and talk about those. Yeah.
Good distraction while we're waiting for Luigi to get fired up.
All right. Have a good night. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks,
everybody.
I appreciate it. Thank you.